Hi, Mike McGinnis with agriculture.com. We are visiting today via Zoom with David Brown. He's the president of Certified Exchange Specialist and a Certified Exchange Specialist with the Iowa Property Exchange 1031, better known as IPE 1031, based out of Iowa. David, first off, how are you?
I'm great. Good morning. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
You bet, and thanks for joining us. We're going to be talking to David about a topic that is probably a fairly heavy topic for folks in agriculture, but a very important one. It's about 1031 exchanges, and here in a second, David will give us the exact definition of 1031 exchanges. The layman's term or street reference to the 1031 exchanges, of course, is when farm families are able to use this tool as a way to pass along the farm without encumbering themselves with a lot more taxes. And we're also going to talk about the stepped up basis and estate taxes. And those three, in a lot of ways, are tied together, and in some ways they're not. But we've asked David to talk about this because currently the President Biden administration is considering, and Congress, considering some legislation on this, and it's in the works, but nothing has passed yet. But the end result could be very impactful to farm families. So we're going to spend some time going through this, and I would say if farm families are looking for some really good information to help the future of their farm financially, this information is key. It's probably some of the best information you'll get for a long, long time. And it's information that some people just don't pay attention or don't pay enough attention to. And I'm sure David would attest to that. So David, first off, give us the exact definition and help folks understand what a 1031 exchange is.
Absolutely. So Section 1031 allows for the exchange of real properties, whether it be a farm, a commercial building, any investment property, commercial or business use properties. As long as somebody sells a property and goes into a new replacement property, what Section 1031 does is it allows that taxpayer to defer the tax and move that gain or retain their equity in order to go into that new asset. It was enacted in 1921. With the recognition by Congress that as long as taxpayers are keeping dollars invested and in the economy, they want to incentivize investors and landowners to retain those dollars, keep them moving, and they don't want to penalize investors and business owners if they were to sell and reposition assets. So it's really an incredible economic driver and ability for business use and landowners to retain capital, continue to invest, continue to build their holdings through time. And it's not a tax avoidance tool; it's a tax deferral tool. But in essence, if I'm taking an example. And for your viewers, if somebody were to sell an 80-acre farm that was 20 miles away and bring it closer to home to a property that maybe came up for sale once in a generation, maybe it's the neighbor's property, they could sell that 80-acre parcel and go into the new property without paying that capital gains tax and being penalized and being tax locked for fear of paying that. So it's really allows business and investors and farmers and others to retain their capital within their operation.
Is this an option that farmers and their families most of the time don't even consider or think about until the farm is getting ready to sell, or there's some sort of passing of the owner? Now they have to figure out what to do with the farm. I'm just trying to express that this 1031 exchange is not really something that you hear a lot about in the general discussion with agriculture topics, but it's a real important one. And I'm just wondering if farm families shouldn't be considering this or thinking about this or talking about this at the dinner table or Thanksgiving table, whatever, more often?
Yes and no. I mean, I think there are. Farmers and ag is big business, and it's sophisticated business. And I think that as people have come to understand Section 1031 exchanges more and more over time, that there is a general awareness. And really, the level of sophistication and understanding of exchanges has gone up year by year from, even when we started the business in 2003, going into almost 20 years. Just the appreciation and understanding for the benefits and how powerful 1031 is to farmers and loan owners has gone up significantly. Now, with that said, I mean, if somebody has held on to a farm, generationally, or just acquired assets and hasn't done a lot of selling and repurchasing, it certainly is something that could be new to them in terms of awareness. So oftentimes, an example is we'll have the farm family who will go connect with the accountant and say, gosh, I want to, again, in my example, bring this 80 acres that's 20 miles away and put it into a higher CSO or higher quality, ground that adjoins another parcel. And the accountant would say, well, gosh, have you considered a 1031 exchange? Or the tax attorney, or just the rural practitioner would say, hey, here's an opportunity if you're going to do this. You should utilize Section 1031 because it allows you to defer the tax as opposed to using, the after-tax dollars from the sale and having to reinvest it. So, it's probably a mix of really awareness, but there's surprisingly, I think, a fair amount. And if there's not, to your previous point, this is one of the most powerful tools for farmers and landowners available. And real property owners. It's just been a remarkable economic driver, and that's why it's been in the code for 100 years.
Well, this is a time in agriculture that we're seeing a lot of land transferring from retired farmers or unfortunately farmers that have passed away, because the age of the farmer is getting older. The average age of the farmer is getting older as we know it. And there could be a lot of land transferred, land ownership transferred. And this is an important topic for farm families. And that's why we're trying to discuss it today with, for those just tuning in, David Brown. He's the president and certified exchange specialist with Iowa Property Exchange 1031, better known as IPE 1031. And David, I know you have some charts that you want to show us, and maybe some examples to help explain the whole idea of the 1031 exchange. And we'll let you do that. I think examples are probably the best way to help people understand what kind of option this might be for their farm families.
Absolutely. Oh gosh, I already screwed this up. I'm sorry. I thought I had it lined up to go to our slide.
While you do that, I might also remind the listeners and the viewers that we're going to be speaking about estate tax and also stepped up basis that relate and are intertwined in some ways with the 1031 exchange.
All right. So, gosh, this is not going nearly as smoothly as I expected it would. So my apologies, but I can quickly move on to the end here to talk about some examples. I think really you just want to, should I go through these?
Yes, why don't you?
Okay, so there's really an underappreciation for how Section 1031 is utilized in ag. And what I can tell you is our business is primarily, remarkably based on ag transactions. And I always say, and I can't back this up, but if we don't do, more ag exchange transactions, as a percentage of, our business compared to any other exchange company in the country, I'd be surprised. We handle thousands of these exchanges. And by way of example, we took statistics from 2015 to 2019, and out of the $3 billion that our company handled, and that's just our company. That's not the whole universe of exchanges. Approximately $2.3 billion of those involved ag assets.
Wow.
So that's, when you talk about the impact of, tax provisions and legislation and what's the day-to-day impact to the ag community, it's enormous what Section 1031 does. And oftentimes, you don't hear the examples of how 1031 is used. And what I can say with certainty out of, being in business for nearly 20 years and handling thousands of exchange transactions is that 1031 is utilized by everyday, average, small to medium farmers and landowners to improve their operations, reposition, and for really opportunities that are well-intentioned and serve a highly beneficial utility for the economy and for farmers. So it's a long way of getting into, here's an example, 80 acres, 20 miles away. I already talked a little bit about that. The farmer's neighbor lists a 160-acre high-quality farm. So 1031 allows farmers to reposition, to consolidate, to become more efficient by having that larger parcel. This would be the first example.
So under that example, David, the farmer looking to do a 1031 exchange would have to sell some property and take that money and buy the neighbor's property, which is better soil?
It could be, or it could have joined an existing larger tract that allows them to, have greater operational efficiencies. Yes.
I'm just trying to get to the point that the exchange part is exchanging some poor soil ground for some better, but that has to be for tax purposes. You can't just pull some money out of the bank, buy that neighbor's ground, and use that as a 1031 exchange. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly right. So, if this 80-acre tract sold for $500,000 and the 160-acre tract sold for $1 million, what happens is at the time of the closing, based upon setting up some exchange documents, and that's what our company does, is we handle the exchange document process, which is a requirement under the IRS rules. So we would set up exchange documents at the time of the closing. The funds go to a separate account that's set up for the exchanger, and then at the time of the closing of the 160 acres, documents would go in place to make sure that everything is compliant with the IRS rules. And the $500,000 combined with either new debt or new cash that the farmer would put into the property would be used to acquire the 160-acre parcel. And variations of this occur. So it could be a 240-acre tracts or an 80 and a 40, or you can sell multiple properties and go into one larger property, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm. I'm just trying to make sure that people understand where the money is coming from to buy this 160 acres.
Right.
Does it have to come from the sale of another farm?
No, not from another farm. Yes, I mean another real property, and that's an important clarification too. That 1031 doesn't require a farm for a farm. Any real property can be exchanged for any other real property. So a farmer could go into commercial asset, retail, office, storage, and the same can be true. You can take commercial assets into farm assets.
Okay.
And one thing I want to really jump on is that is a very, very rare occurrence. I mean, rare in the sense of a fraction of a percent that people go from non-farm assets into ag assets. So sometimes 1031 gets knocked for, commercial or urban buyers going into, farm assets, and that doesn't happen. And we can demonstrate that through our statistics. So, farmers understand farms, commercial owners understand commercial, so they generally stick to their lanes, and that's how it works.
Okay. And this example here is showing that it can be multiple tracks.
Yeah, it could. So any variation of sizes or tracks. I mean, there's some limits in terms of how this can be accomplished under the rules, but for purposes of our discussion, people should assume they could sell multiple tracks to consolidate, or if they wanted to go into a more diverse approach and purchase, different assets, maybe in different parts of the country because they, climate issues or whatever, that's an option as well. Mm-hmm. One other thing I'd mention here. So, a lot of times, so 1031 is also becoming more and more utilized as a conservation tool. And what I mean by that is, permanent conservation easements are considered real property assets for exchange purposes. Mm-hmm. So if NRCS comes and says, hey, I want to buy these wetlands, this farm, we're going to put it back in the wetlands. And so what we're going to do is sell the easement, buy the easement from you, for a per acre value, which equates to, the loss of the ability to produce on the property. So if the property's worth $5,000 an acre, we'll pay you $4,000 an acre. Take those sensitive acres out of production, that it can go into a more appropriate or environmentally appropriate property. And so with the nutrient reduction strategies and what everybody's intent, farmers included, on accomplishing. It's being used as a tool to take, tougher acres, wetter acres out of production and go into something else that might be more appropriate.
Okay. You can stop sharing if you, for now. I'd like to see you. Back. There we go. And then we can go back to, the sharing in just a little bit with more examples.
You bet.
But the conservation point is very important. I mean, we're hearing more and more about the conservation efforts that the Biden administration is trying to promote, and farmers may be faced with more decisions regarding conservation going forward.
Yeah, when you think about the potential for the Build Back Better infrastructure plan, climate, and that's going to be a big part of it. And there have been dollars allocated to NRCS to buy easements. There's wetlands reserve, there's grasslands reserve, there's emergency watershed dealing with, in our neck of the woods, Missouri and Mississippi watershed. Mm-hmm. That could be an opportunity to have federal dollars under any new infrastructure plan. Those could be utilized to acquire those sensitive acres, which would allow farmers to be able to exchange into something else, which, not only, serves the conservation purpose, but allows them to, keep cash flow and keep, in that same level of operating capacity that they had before the sale.
We're speaking with David Brown. He's the president and also a certified exchange specialist with Iowa Property Exchange, IPE 1031. The idea that 1031 exchanges can be benefit for farm families. David, give us some other examples, if you would. When is a good time for farmers to consider this option, and what other important things should we be mentioning here and expressing to farmers about the option of a 1031 exchange?
Yeah. So other examples, we have, you mentioned the generational transfer that's accelerating. So 1031 is being utilized as a tool to sell to siblings, to sell to kids. Mm-hmm. And what that does is allows the landowner or the farmer to go reinvest somewhere else. And oftentimes that's the case of, son or daughter buying the home farm. So they want to preserve where everything began, and it may be a good situation for them to work through the family repositioning situation. Mm-hmm. We had seen large numbers of properties owned by siblings that have been inherited, and they are owned in a tenant in common or a fractional interest by, let's just say it's 3 siblings. And they inherit the property. Maybe they inherited it 15 years ago. Their basis is lower and they've had appreciation, and one of the sibling wants to buy out the other 2 siblings, and those siblings would like to go in to buy some other replacement property. So It's in terms of the family planning and ability to, for the producing sibling to keep the home farm. It's a tool to facilitate those types of transactions. We see that all the time. Let me think of. I've got some other example. Oh, retirement planning. Not only is 1031 used for operations, but if a retiring farmer wanted to go into some other asset, or a rental property in Arizona to be, for whatever reason, or Florida, or maybe to be near the kids in Milwaukee or somewhere else,
Mm-hmm.
there's opportunities to do some planning to allow for farmers and landowners to go into assets in other areas of the country that might serve them more appropriately. And maybe they want to, get out of farming for whatever reason and go into some commercial assets, for other reasons. And again, that's a pretty rare situation, but in the past, there was discussions about, hey, you should only be able to exchange a farm for a farm. And after lots of studies by USDA and others, the conclusion was, gosh, you're only hurting yourself. Because, first of all, there are few people exchanging out of non-farm assets into farm assets. And second, what if the farmer, the landowner wants to go into something else for
Mm-hmm.
whatever reason? That shouldn't be limited, especially when it's not really a factor, an impact on ag.
So what can't you use money to reinvest in? In other words, I sell a farm. What can't I use that money for in a 1031 exchange?
You go ahead.
You're saying that I can take that money and reinvest in rental property and possibly a vacation home, maybe go into some other type of business, commercial building, storage, whatever. But what is it that you can't go into or use that money from the farm sale to invest in?
You can't go into stocks. You can't exchange a real property asset into stock. And that includes like a family corporate, shares of a family corporation that, may be part of the family ownership structure. You can't go into notes, bonds. You cannot go into personal property. You cannot exchange a farm for a combine, or you cannot exchange, a farm for really any personal property asset. And
House that you live in?
The house that you live in. So no, residential real estate, what qualifies, but not your personal residence. And that's a whole different provision. So if somebody had a house that they had lived in for 2 out of the last 5 years, they could exclude gain of up to $250,000 for an individual and $500,000 per couple.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's some planning that if somebody said, gosh, I want to go into a house out of from Mason City to Des Moines, if that property were rented for a couple of years, after that 2-year period, it could be converted to a personal residence. They wouldn't be able to exchange out of it again, but there's, you bring up to your point, there's some really remarkable opportunities to, take an investment asset and after a couple year period of time, reposition it into a personal use asset that's allowed under the tax code.
And you also can't sell the farm and use that money to buy cryptocurrencies, correct?
You definitely cannot. There was the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act eliminated artwork, cryptocurrencies, and a number of other, different things that folks were doing.
No Bitcoin.
Right.
Well, let's move on to estate taxes. Talk about the legislation. Give us the current state of estate taxes. And when people hear, other people talk about this, they think they're talking about state taxes, but this is a state. And give us a current state of what's going on with estate taxes.
Okay, so estate taxes. There's three issues I think that are near and dear to farmers. That there's concerns about what's the potential impact of legislation. So estate tax is one of them, and under the present law, there's an exemption for estates of $11.7 million for an individual and $23.4 million per couple. So if the farm family owns assets of under 11.7, there is no estate tax. And for a couple, again, mom and dad could pass on $23.4 million together, and there will be no estate tax.
Okay.
Prior to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2016, that exemption was $5.5 million for an individual and $11 million per couple. So that got bumped up during the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And that's referred to as the death tax, and gets lots of attention in the media. And is important. And for farm families that have these values of assets, congratulations. But here's really, I think, the practical impact, which is really important. So I was researching this morning, a Des Moines Register article talked about what was the impact of the estate tax in 2016 at the $5.5 million and $11 million exemption level. And so what the studies or what the statistics show is that 0.1% of estates pay taxes nationally. Now, what that means is, to the ag context, and this is across the country in 2016, and this isn't the $11 million limit. This is the $5.5 million pre-Tax Cuts and Jobs Act limit. So at that pre-Tax Cuts and Jobs Act limit, only 682 filers nationally owned farm assets. And then dialing that down even further, the article stated that nationally, only 160 farm operations owed estate tax. And then in Iowa alone, and this is all assets included, not just farms, only 60 Iowans paid estate tax in 2016. That was at the $5.5 million limit. That got doubled. So when considering what is the impact on agriculture of a proposed reduction in the estate tax rate, exemption, I should say, which the Biden proposal is $3.5 million and $7 million per couple. So it definitely would have an impact. I'm not advocating for or against. I mean, I completely respect how it's important to ag, but I think the conclusion after I was looking at this is, I mean, it just would have a really nominal impact for the most part.
Right.
And again, I know it's important to the ag associations, and that's great, but that's the reality.
So the threshold levels for that death tax were so high that it wasn't really including as many people as the Biden administration's levels might, because you're saying that the threshold levels are being dropped, and that could catch a lot more farm families out there.
It could, but with the appreciation of land values, I mean, we're in a whole different world than we were, even 5 years ago. I mean, we're seeing what's happening with commodity prices. So there definitely has to be an inflation factor that goes into it. And keep in mind, these are Biden campaign proposals. This is not legislation. I'm on the chair, our government affairs committee for our national trade organization. So we have our lobbyist in DC is, well tuned in. I've consulted with him, and I'm saying, hey, in preparing for this, what's the practical impact of the Biden campaign proposals, or what's the likely result? And one, I mean, you've got this proposal from the campaign. You have the existing exemption of 11.7. I mean, if there's any change, it's going to be probably somewhere in the middle, in which case, it still probably impacts, few farmers and landowners. And then there's also, this is a big deal to ag. And so, ag's going to have a say, and there's potential carve outs for farm exemptions, ongoing business owners. There could be a carve out that says you don't owe it until, heirs sell the property. So there's different things that can be utilized to mitigate the impact to the extent that this becomes an issue.
And so, time-wise, what are your lobbyists telling you about this possible legislation?
All right, so we just finished the rescue plan, so or I don't know if it's finished, but it feels like we're about ready to get it signed. And so, the president's historically, and President Biden is at peak power for the first 8 months of his administration. So all eyes will go to the Build Back Better plan, which is going to relate to infrastructure, climate, some other priorities that might get mixed in there as well. Oh, green energy and
infrastructure.
Infrastructure, right? Exactly. So all eyes will go to that, and that. So then the thought is between now April and August or September is when the pen will go to paper and we'll start seeing what comes out of that, and that's. There's all kinds of priorities and different diverging interests within the Democratic caucus, including centrists who, would say, gosh, we're not messing with the state tax in Montana or Manchin in West Virginia, farm states. I mean, there are a number of centrist swing vote Democrats that, will have a problem with, tax provisions that would impact ag.
Okay. We're speaking with David Brown. If you're just tuning in, he's the president of Iowa Property Exchange. That's better known as IPE 1031. He's a certified exchange specialist. It's an instrument that farm families can consider to use when not avoiding paying taxes, but using it as an alternative, as David has explained. The other thing we want to talk about that goes along with this topic a little bit, David, is stepped up basis. And, you have a family that the parents may have died, or it's the kids somehow have inherited the farm. And if they're considering selling the farm, are they going to get taxed on this farm sale at the current rate, or a value of the farm, or is it going to be at the rate or value of when the farm was purchased in the 50s or 60s or 70s, whatever, years ago?
Yeah. Okay. So if I attempt to not screw this up again, how do you feel about me sharing my screen?
Go ahead. It would be helpful to the viewers as well.
Okay.
We've been talking about 1031 exchange, also the death tax, and now we're going to step into the stepped up basis, which is, again, very complicated for most folks. And the only time that a lot of farmer families ever really think about this is when they have to deal with it at a farm sale, or when they're considering selling the farm. So we want to offer up this information now, which could be helpful.
All right, so I'm going to keep it out of the slideshow. So stepped up basis is really the cost of the asset for tax purposes. If my mom and dad bought a property for $100,000 in 1985 and the value rose to $500,000 today, their basis, in other words, their initial investment, is $100,000. If they sell that property today for $500,000, they don't have to pay the tax on the $400,000, or they do have to pay the tax, on the $400,000 of gain.
Okay.
Stepped up basis says that if the heirs inherit the property today and that property is valued at $500,000, the basis from mom and dad goes from $100,000 to $500,000 in the hands of the person who inherited the property. So, here's another example. If a property, if the property was purchased for $500,000 in 1985, 160 acres, sale price of the property would be 1.5. There's $1 million of gain that would be taxed. if they sold it today. Now, under current law, if the owner passed away, the inheritors would get the stepped-up basis from $500,000 to $1.5 million, and they would not have to pay any tax on the sale at the time that they sold it. So stepped-up basis is really, raising the tax cost to those who inherit the property.
Is the stepped-up basis threatened in legislation that's being worked on right now?
Well, potentially. So there are proposals to eliminate stepped-up basis, and the issue there is that the thought is that the heirs should pay the tax on that gain that accumulated through the asset over the years, and that's even versus a state tax, it's highly controversial in ag, understandably. I mean, if heirs inherit the property and, the good news is there's a big gain and there's a big asset that they inherited. So it's all relative, but you don't want to be put in a position of, having to sell the farm or pay the tax. And I don't think that would happen in any case, because, you wouldn't have to pay the tax at the time of death. It only would be at the time of the sale if stepped up basis were to go away. And the reason for the proposal to eliminate stepped-up basis is to pay for other, programs under the infrastructure bill. Now, again, there could be carve-outs for farm exemptions for ongoing business owners only when they sell. And while this is certainly a critically important topic, our folks in DC have heard directly from senior Democratic members and staff who have stated this is not doable. There's no way that they think they can get this accomplished. And again, as I mentioned, there are several farm, ranch, state Democratic senators who are swing votes, and they will not go along with it. So what I'm hearing is that while everything is on the table in terms of proposed, revenue raisers for tax purposes, stepped-up basis would be extremely difficult to achieve.
Okay, and that's probably good news for farmers that are listening here today.
Yeah, and something to keep an eye on for sure.
Yeah, David, give us as we wrap up here, give us a feel for how people can get a hold of you and what kind of services you can help them with when they consider a 1031 exchange or any of these other topics that we've talked about, actually.
So in order to do an exchange, you have to utilize a qualified intermediary company to handle the transaction, and that's what we specialize in. So if somebody has a sale that they're considering, they want to get in touch with us to talk about their transaction and talk about the details before they, sell the property. We, handle all the exchange documents that are required under the IRS rules. And we'll walk folks through it from start to finish. And we specialize in this. This is all we do. And again, we've been doing it for 20 years and have a real strong specialty in ag and across the country. So our website is www.ipe1031.com. And that's IPE1031.com. There's a number of tremendous resources on there, including reference guides and educational resources. And I would just encourage people to reach out as they have questions.
And do you have a phone number that you could also throw out?
I do, yes, 888-226-0400. Again, that's 888-226-0400.
Okay. 888-226-0400. David, thanks for your time. This is some great information. And like we mentioned earlier, it's information that folks can probably use right now. It's we're coming into a time, I think, in agriculture when we're seeing a lot of incidents where farmers and farms themselves are being transferred. The ownership is, and you have maybe some children of longtime farmers that are not continuing with agriculture or continuing with the production of agriculture and using the land that way, but are in an investment role. And this is some top-notch information, as I'm sure that you're experiencing with your customers. You're probably seeing a lot of this, I imagine.
For sure. I mean, especially with commodity values and the way things are going, it's incredibly busy. And I would just really emphasize here, when you think about the day-to-day stuff, that impacts farmers, when you talk about $2.3 billion of transactional activity of 1031 exchanges over 5 years, and factor in that, most of those, the median was $443,000. So this is, small to medium farmers. This isn't big ag. But from a day-to-day perspective, the impact on operations and, our farm realtors have said if you take 1031, 25% of transactions go away because people are tax locked and they can't sell. And, when you're considering what are the provisions that impact ag the most, I think if people really dive into it, 1031 comes out on top by a very wide margin.
Yeah. And that's why we're speaking to you.
Right.
Well, David, good luck, and let's stay in touch. This is a topic that's not going away anytime soon, I'm sure. So I appreciate your information and your time today, and the way you're trying to help farm families.
Yeah, well, thank you for the we love farm families. We love ag. I do a little farming myself, so it's it's who we are, and again, thank you for the opportunity.
You bet. Thanks for your time.
All right.
That's David Brown, president and also a certified exchange specialist with Iowa Property Exchange, better known as IPE 1031. I'm Mike McGinnis with agriculture.com.